I can't wait to talk about making change today. We are making change in our finances, and as we make change in our finances, we are seeing transformation in the rest of our lives. Because where your treasure is, that's where your heart goes also. And so if you want to deepen your faith, if you want to transform your spirituality, then you can leverage your finances as a tool for change. If you want to see God's kingdom come and His will be done in your life, then you need to align your finances with His kingdom. And so we are making change. Less is more, stress is bad, giving is good, and tomorrow matters. And so we're putting each of those phrases into our mind. Less is more, stress is bad, giving is good, and tomorrow matters. And we started talking about how less is more. We live in a culture that says if one is good, then two is better. But it's not true. Too often, more just means more hard work. It means more toil. It means chasing after the wind. In fact, less is more. And so we're trying to make room in our life. And stress is bad. Whenever you live beyond the means that God has given you, you become enslaved to money. And that creates stress. And so we need to be set free. You've got to stop circumventing what God has given you. Well, God, you didn't give me enough, and so I put that on a credit card. Well, God, my paycheck wasn't big enough, and so I went out and I got a payday loan. But stress kills you, literally. It wreaks havoc in your physical body, and stress destroys your relationships. Stress is bad. Don't become enslaved to money. Live inside the means that God has given you. And today I want to talk about how giving is good. Giving is good. Let me say it again. Giving is good. Giving is close to the very heart of God. Perhaps the most famous and well-known verse in all of the Bible comes from John's Gospel about Jesus. For God so loved the world that He gave. He gave. God gave. Over and over, the Bible tells us about the God who gives. And so when you give, you are close to the heart of God. Giving is good. Jesus said it this way. It's more blessed to give than to receive. Let me make sure I get it right. It's more blessed to give than to receive. Now, Jesus didn't say that it's not a blessing to receive. It's great to receive. I like receiving. This is Father's Day, and so for dads, you might receive a special gift or a special meal today. That's awesome. But at the same time, you know that it's more awesome when you give to your kids. It's more blessed to give than to receive. Giving is good. There's more favor and more happiness in giving. Giving is good. Giving aligns your heart with God's heart. Giving is good. So if you have a Bible, you can turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 9. Now, if you don't have a Bible, we want to give you one. We love giving Bibles. The Bible is God's story about Himself given to us. We love the Bible and we want you to explore it, to read it for yourself, to wrestle with it. And so we've got some Bibles available with you. If you have a phone, you can download an app. A church in Oklahoma developed an app. It costs them thousands upon thousands of dollars in development and hosting and getting licensing rights and putting devotions together and on and on and on. And they just give it all away. They have that app, Bible.com/app. They do that because giving is good. And then we're going to have the verses on the screen. 2 Corinthians is a letter that's written to a church in the city of Corinth. It's written by a guy named Paul, and it's the second letter in the Bible that we have that's written to this church. That's why we call it 2 Corinthians. And one of the things that Paul writes to them about is he reminds them that when he comes, he is collecting an offering from them and from other churches to give to people in Jerusalem who are going through a famine. And so he takes some time in the middle of this letter to teach them about giving. And this is what it says in 2 Corinthians chapter 9, starting in verse 10. For God is the one who provides seed for the farmer and then bread to eat. In the same way, He will provide and increase your resources and then produce a great harvest of generosity in you. Yes, you will be enriched in every way so that you can always be generous. And when we take your gifts to those who need them, they will thank God. Imagine people thanking God. Why? Because you were generous. Because you were a blessing in their lives. Aren't you thankful for people that have been generous to your life? You know someone that gave? You know, someone gave so that we could gather together as a church. Someone gave before you and I ever showed up for our first gathering. They gave long before that. Thank you, God, for generous people in my life. And so if we know that giving is good, if we know that it's more blessed to give than it is to receive, that raises a question, which is, why don't we do it more often? Seriously, why don't we do it more often? Now, I'm not saying that I'm trying to guilt you into giving today. Making change is not about this church or the pastor trying to get your money. If you don't give today, there will be no change from us next week. We will still love you and be glad that you're here. This is about seeing transformation and a deepening in our spiritual journey. For a lot of us, there is tremendous opportunity to give and then see change in our lives. Now, I think there are probably some typical reasons that the people don't give. I mean, giving is good, but we don't tap into that goodness. And the first reason is that we don't feel like we have enough. I mean, we'd love to do more, but we're kind of struggling right now. We'd love to do more, but it's kind of tight right now. Our heart feels like it's in the right place, but we just feel like we don't have the ability. Another reason that some people don't give is because we've seen this message abused. I mean, you don't want to just call out anybody, but you know what I'm talking about, right? The slick-haired guy on the television, if you sow your seed, if you give me $100, then you'll go ahead and you'll get back $1,000, and the whole thing that goes with that. And there's some skepticism, probably some healthy skepticism that goes with that. It's like, oh, here we go again. I don't want to hear about that, and so because we've seen it abused. And then a third reason, and this is one that I've grown up with and one that I struggle with and still have to wrestle with, is that we often live with a scarcity mindset instead of an abundance mindset. In other words, if I give, that means I'm going to have less, and there's really not enough to go around. If you have something, that means that I don't have access to it. And so rather than having an abundant mindset, which says that I am blessed to be a blessing, that we serve an abundant God who provides for the needs of His people, often through His people, a scarcity mindset says, I will never ever have enough. And with scarcity driving your life, you always need more before you can give generously, and that's why you don't. And unfortunately, scarcity leads to selfishness. You're always looking at what you have and what others have. You're always focusing on yourself and comparing yourself to the world around you. But we can retrain our minds. We can make change. It's more blessed to give than it is to receive. Whenever you give, you are always a blessing. And whenever you give, you will always be blessed. Let me say that again. Whenever you give, you are always a blessing, and whenever you give, you will always be blessed. Now, that doesn't mean that you give 100 and you get back 1,000. I mean, you might. God could do it that way. That's certainly not out of the realm of possibilities. But what it means is that you have the fulfillment, the joy, the sense of destiny that God used you to make a difference in someone else's life. You will be a blessing and you will be blessed. And so if giving is good, then I want to get better at it. If giving is good, then I want to grow in generosity. And so today I want to talk about 3 giving practices that we should implement in our lives to make change. The first practice is to give a tithe. As people who follow Jesus, this is where we start. We give a tithe. We don't give a tip, we give a tithe. What's a tithe? A tithe is 1/10, 10%. We start by trusting God and giving Him 10% of all that we receive. Giving our tithe is an act of worship to God. It's how God's people have been worshiping Him from the very beginning. It's how we honor God with all of our lives. This is where we start. I mean, for some of us, we give 40, 50, 60 hours of our life to receive that paycheck. For some of us, we've given that over the course of time, and now we're living on retirement, and it's a reflection of a life spent doing that. And so when we give that 10%, it's not just giving 10% of our money, it's giving this portion of everything that we are, that we used to earn that money. And so we start there. In fact, we would say that the tithe doesn't even belong to us. It belongs to God. I return that to Him as an act of worship. In other words, if I get $100, then the first 10 is technically not mine. It belongs to God. The first, not the last 10, the first 10. Now that sounds crazy. I know that sounds crazy. And you might be saying, well, when I decided to follow Jesus, I didn't know I was signing up for that. But Jake, in order to do that, I would have to totally and completely, 100% rearrange my life around God. If I give a tithe, 10% of my income, I've got to redo my budget and rearrange my life. Is that what you're saying? Well, yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. We only believe the things that we're willing to act out. And so if you believe that God is the one who provides wholly and completely for your salvation, He's taken away your sin, He's made a way for you to be connected with Him, and He's made you whole. You believe that God is all sufficient and that He provides everything that you need. You believe that God is good and wants to give you good things. If you believe all of those things, then giving 10% is just an action that shows your belief. But if you won't give a tithe to God in worship, then I would ask you, what do you believe about God? It's time to make a change. Rearrange your life to give. Rearrange your life to make honoring God your first priority. And when you do this, you will see your faith and spirituality transform in ways that you didn't know was possible. I want to share Mark's story. Mark is a part of Epic Church, and our family of churches. We have Epic Church and Sought Church, and this is his story of rearranging his life to give a tithe. $30,000. That's how much debt I had when I left my service in the Navy on disability. While I was serving, a family member had experienced a severe financial hardship, and I opened up credit cards to help cover her debt. As a kid just out of the Navy, I was only able to make a little over the minimum payment. It would take forever to pay off. As a disabled vet, I moved back in with my mom. I started parking cars at the Rio, a job I hated and with no future, but at least it paid some of the bills. When I met Karen, we had dreams of starting a family and buying a house, but we knew something needed to change. I was eventually able to head to college on the VA's dime. It was me, Karen, and a 1-year-old living on a small income as I learned as much as I could. I'm a computer geek. I can build them, fix them, and network them. And so I tried my hand at running a computer business where I could do the things that I loved. I believed in God during all of this. In fact, my mom was the pianist at the church where I grew up. But my philosophy was always that God got whatever money was left over. I paid every other bill, and if there was extra, I'd give it to the local church. I only tithed when I could afford to do so. And we continued living hand to mouth for a long time. When the kids were really little, our church did a training on tithing, and it completely shifted my way of thinking. I realized it's not just 10% of my money that belongs to God. Everything I have is God's. And so if He wants me to give 10% of that, He can have it. And I started giving out of our need. Every month it was a choice of paying a bill or giving our tithe. And we always chose to tithe first. And somehow the bills always got paid. Our community rallied around us and loved us well through that time. Emotions run ragged when you're going through that struggle, because, side note, stress is bad. You know that God promises to be faithful, but sometimes you still question, why, God? I'm doing what you said, but I'm not seeing the results. And this season was filled with not understanding, but still holding on to the belief that God was faithful. Our computer business was draining our finances and energy, and so I finally got a job as a computer programmer. Over the years, opportunities came my way, bonuses, raises, promotions, new jobs, and every week I continued tithing. As my salary increased, my giving increased. At the same time, our family continued to grow. In a 9-year time span, my salary more than doubled. We bought a house large enough to fit 11 people. We're secure and have consistently been able to give over and above 10% of our income. Now, every week when I write our tithe check, it's always written with thankfulness. Each check reminds me of my journey and how God has put me in this place to be able to continue to be generous. That's such a good testimony. Giving is good. Rearrange your life to give. Give God a tithe. The second practice is to plan your generosity. You start by giving a tithe, and then you plan for generosity. You don't accidentally become generous. You've got to plan for generosity. We make plans to acquire all the time, right? How can I save enough? Where can I find a sale, a coupon, a discount? You know, when I go shopping, I have my phone out. I'm scanning those UPC codes. I'm trying to find it for cheaper everywhere I go. I know some of you do the couponing thing. You know, you cut out coupons and you save coupons. It takes you a half hour to get through the checkout, but man, you save some money because you've made a plan. You know, you've made a plan about what you're going to get. Well, what if we sat around and we said, hey, how can we plan not just to get more, but how can we plan to give more? How can we plan to be more generous? I mean, what if we stood around and strategized? How can we rearrange our lives since it's more blessed to give than it is to receive? How can I be a blessing to even more people? In fact, that's exactly what generous people do. This is what the prophet Isaiah says. He says, but generous people plan to do what is generous, and they stand firm in their generosity. Generous people plan to do what is generous. It's not accidental or incidental. It's intentional. We plan to be generous. Now, your plan can start small. It can start with $1 a week, or maybe it's $20 a week. You know, you make it a part of your budget. You start keeping a cash fund with you, and then when the moment strikes, you can move in generosity. You give to someone who's in need. You cover a meal for someone just because. You hear what a friend really wants, and you go to the store and you buy it for them, and then you give it to them as a gift. I mean, this is the fun stuff. The tithe is God's, but that's what we give together as a church, is our tithe. And then this generosity is the fun stuff that you get to do. You get to give when something moves your heart, and you get to give when a disaster strikes, or you go and buy some school supplies. You give to the thing that moves your heart because you've made a plan to be generous. Imagine if generosity was the measuring stick of your financial health. Imagine if generosity was the financial goal that you planned for. So instead of asking, like, how much do I need to get to retire, we ask, how much do I need to save in order for me to be able to increase my generosity as I get older? Our financial health isn't based on how much is in my bank account, or if I was able to purchase a better car or a bigger house. What if the measurement was how much was I able to increase my generosity? Now, I'm not saying that we don't have a growing retirement account or a healthy bank account or a nice house. What I'm saying is that our financial plans and goals are based on generosity because giving is good. And then the third practice is to start now. Wait a minute, I thought we were trying to get out of debt. Stress is bad. We're trying to get out of it. Oh yeah, absolutely. We're trying to get out of debt. But there's a supernatural part along the way. We're not going to wait until we're out of debt to start being a blessing. We're going to be a blessing along the way, and then watch that as we bless others, we will be blessed as well. And so we're going to start now. We're ready to make some change right now. I don't want to wait any longer to make change. I want to start it in my life right now. One of my favorite sayings from the Bible about finances comes from Proverbs. And it says, the world of the generous gets larger and larger, but the world of the stingy gets smaller and smaller. I don't know about you, but I want my world to get larger. And I want it to get larger now. Do you see the dilemma you put yourself in? If you wait until your world gets large enough to be generous, then you'll be waiting a long time. Because while you're waiting, your world shrinks. And then you think to yourself, well, I'll just have to wait a little longer. But then your world shrinks some more. And I've watched it over and over again in the lives of people. They think they can contract their world and then that they'll magically be able to expand it later. But it doesn't work like that. You have to be generous with what you have now. You've got to start now. But Jake, if I give 10%, I won't have any other cash to be generous with now. That's okay. Have a generous heart. Honor God with a tithe, and then be generous with your time. Give an extra hour or two. Honor God with a tithe, and then be generous with your smile and with your attitude. Make people feel good. Honor God with your tithe, and then be generous with your words. Write cards and give compliments. Let gratitude get deep in your heart. Let generosity get deep in your heart. Get down in your soul. Let it make your inside bigger. And then as you work on being generous with the little things, then you'll start right now, and then you'll begin to see some bigger things come into your life, and then you'll already be ready to be generous. Giving is good. I want you to imagine what a year of giving would mean. Paul wrote that people will thank God because of your giving. How many lives will be changed because of your giving? I mean, I know your life will be. I'm talking about how many more lives will be changed. How many people will come into a gathering like this and find what they've been looking for because of your giving? How much larger will your world be because of your generosity over the course of 12 months? I have no doubt that when God gave His Son, He could see you and He could see me. God gave His Son, His one and only Son, but He saw the results of His giving. He could give that one and only Son knowing that He could see in the future and imagine gaining sons and daughters all throughout history and all over the world. Giving is good. You have to imagine, what would it look like? What would it look like if over the course of this next year you were generous with your coworkers? You were the most generous person at your workplace. How much would it change their lives? There are people that you've been praying for and hoping and asking and hoping that they will come see Jesus. What would it mean if over the course of a year you embraced this giving is good and you showed them that you were giving and that you were generous? How much would that move them toward Jesus? What would it mean in your neighborhoods and in your church if over the next 12 months you embrace generosity? Imagine the transformation that could take place, because giving is good.